So hello, welcome. This is Headlocks and Headphones. My name is Martin Anderson, with you for however long we're going to be this week. A bit of a serious week this week. If you are on our social media, you'll understand what I'm meaning. We are going to have something from Stuart Murphy from CWF that isn't about his company. Well, it kind of is, but it's about something different. And we have CWF sponsoring the show. This week, CWF is not sponsoring the show because this is not so much about the company itself and more about the person. This is not Stuart Murphy, the person who's running a business, that is going to be talking today. It's actually Stuart Murphy, the person who has a few things to get off his chest. So we're going to reveal what they are very, very soon. But first, we're going to go different show this week because it's a little bit more serious, and I haven't watched all that much wrestling this week. We're going to try and do it all in one go rather than having little bumpers and everything in between. So let's kind of go through some of the big stories. There's basically going to be two versions of Opinion Corner this week. One is in relation to Tony Khan, and the other is in relation to the video from Stuart Murphy. So we'll get to those at the end of the show. Let's look at the wrestling news. Now, firstly, I don't want to just have the wrestling news be all about bad stuff, but for everybody out there who knows who Dwayne Gill is, Gillberg, he's now out the hospital just days after suffering a heart attack. It happened on the 25th of November, so thankfully that means it's probably not that bad of a heart attack, but a heart attack's still a heart attack. It's still a bad thing. But James Ellsworth, who's his friend, do you know what? If two people are going to be friends, I assume they would be two jobbers. But James said Dwayne had a heart attack yesterday, but he's doing okay. He's doing good. He just got out the ICU, doing very well. I just wanted to say that first and foremost, he's doing fine, and he should be okay going forward. Hopefully, he'll be home this weekend and start transitioning into getting back to normal. But his wife did want me to come on here and tell everyone what's going on. So please send your prayers to Gillberg and his family at this time. Hopefully, he'll be home soon and back to his normal fun self. Now, I know James Ellsworth has had some negative stories in recent months. They've kind of died down a little bit, but the stories were bad. If you don't know what they are, go out of your way to see them because some of them are pretty negative. But the positive here is, yeah, Dwayne Gill did have some issues, but Dwayne is back. Hopefully by now he should be back home. As I record this, he should be hopefully getting back to fighting fit. So if you are a Gillberg fan, go out of your way. I believe there is GoFundMe and stuff set up as well just to help with these medical costs. So if you do have the ability to spare even a couple of pounds, go out of your way and support Gillberg, who, if you are a fan of wrestling, you haven't seen Gillberg stuff, go on YouTube and check out his impersonation. He was Dwayne Gill. He was one of the main job guys for a long time. He wore masks. He wore different costumes. He was at one point a turtle, I believe. So he has been various gimmicks, but the one that's Gillberg is the one that everybody seems to remember. So that's something to go out of your way to check if you don't know who he is. Hopefully everybody watching this show knows who Dwayne Gill is, who Gillberg is. But another person who has kind of also had a few stories from the Speaking Out movement would be Chris Hero. And he was fired in April from NXT. And when he was fired, it wasn't anything to do with the Speaking Out movement. That hadn't happened yet. And some of the allegations from the Speaking Out movement are about Chris are thankfully on the smaller scale, but still there. So it's best I acknowledge that before I tell the story. But he hasn't done anything in wrestling since he left WWE, and quite a lot of people who were sacked did. And it's quite interesting that he hasn't done anything. He did go on to the Wrestling Genius subreddit, and he left a message for fans. I'm just going to read it out for you. Before anyone asks or infers, I am far from done for wrestling. If I wanted to hang it up and coach, produce, I could have a job tomorrow. I've turned down a number of companies in the last 6 months, not because they've been terrible offers, but because I'm just not ready. I'll come back when the circumstances and the situations are right. Trust me. It kills me to not be out there doing what I love. The time will come, and when it does, it will be spectacular. In the meantime, I appreciate all of your patience. Take care and stay safe. Now, with Chris Hero is one of those guys that I really did like Chris Hero back in the day when he wore the Superman stuff. The matches he was having were incredible. When he joined WWE, I thought, there's no way this can fail. There's a guy who knows what he's doing. He can perform in front of a crowd. And then he got fired, he put on a ton of weight, his body shape changed, and I thought, oh, he let himself go. But then when I saw him actually perform and not just pictures, he still performs pretty much the exact same as he did before with his previous body shape. Chris Hero is somebody who I very much respect, and when I got to see him live, I was very happy to be able to tick that off my list. The fact that he's in a financial position where he can spend time not having to go out and perform, it's very lucky for him, but at the same time means hopefully his body will be nice and refreshed and he'll have lots of creative juices ready to come back and be part of a major company. For me, the best fit for Chris Hero would be Ring of Honor. There's a company who is doing great things recently, and somebody like Chris Hero has a little bit of history there. Going back and doing things would be very, very huge. And that's something that now they have a TV platform. Chris Hero would be on weekly television. Now, before we move on, I did have somebody say that the greatest wrestler in the history of the world who's made the biggest impact was Nigel McGuinness. And I just want to, this isn't an opinion corner thing, but let's kind of get this out of the way. You're wrong. Nigel McGuinness is a great wrestler who wrestling fans appreciate his in-ring work, but the audience that saw his work was so small. The Ring of Honor product was largely a straight-to-DVD product. There was a brief period where they had a TV show where he was there. I believe it was very, very small. His impact was minimal because he wasn't getting people happening upon his performances. He wasn't building an audience. What he had was a captive audience. Ring of Honor, even with the streaming service now, they still have a captive audience. And their TV show is about trying to get people in to watch things. So when Nigel McGuinness was there, Ring of Honor, although as wrestling fans, we watch their stuff and go, do you know what? Look at the roster that came through there. Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, Chris Hero, Claudio Castagnoli, Steve Corino, Tyler Black, Seth Rollins, and the list goes on. And you look at it and you think, do you know what? Had they had national television, there's no way Impact would have been number 2 because they were the better product. Impact had TV because they had Sting, because they had bigger stars. And for me, that's a crying shame. But if Chris Hero goes back now with a TV contract in place and the ability to be seen in every stretch of America, then that can only be a positive, particularly for the people that he works with. Because I know, although he didn't get to the top of the card in NXT, I know he was working with people based on his experience. He was used to get Matt Riddle over. He was used to get several people over. Chris is a very, very interesting talent to have on your roster. Now, we'll move quickly on to Austin Gunn, Billy Gunn's son, who I'm a big fan of as well, somebody who I think has done really well since coming into AEW. Now, he did the Alicia Aitout's podcast, and basically when it comes to competing at All In recently, it's no secret Gunn was a very late addition to the show. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, being an alternate has sometimes led to big things. Just ask Braun Strowman. He said, I didn't know that I was on the show until maybe 7 hours before. I was just there to support my dad and be there for him. We did an indie show the day before, and he was going to take the reins on All In. 7 hours before, he didn't tell me, but he reached out and said, I really want Austin to feel what it's like to be in front of that many people. He got it approved, told me, and it was unreal. Yeah, people will say, well, that was your dad getting you the job. But he went out there and he performed. And this is one of those interesting things about people getting an opportunity. If you put somebody out there that's good and they perform, then they'll continue to get booked. If you put somebody out there because they are, say, Billy Gunn's son, or, Arn Anderson's son, or Taz's son, looking at AEW's product recently, if they suck, they won't be on TV for very long. They will be found out and the fans will turn on them. And that's one of the selling points of AEW, apparently, is that they listen to their fans, unless it's the Dark Order. We won't go down that. He did say something about competing with his dad, which is quite interesting. We have a healthy balance of some things. I'm just going to do it my way, and I'll learn by either doing them, and it works out and being great, or I do them and it doesn't work, and that's the beauty of learning. You have to put yourself out there and fail and try new things, then look back and go, that didn't work. I felt like an idiot. But that's how you improve. A lot of people saying it's great, WWE are getting rid of house shows. This statement here proves exactly why getting rid of house shows entirely is a bad idea. The reason for house shows as well as the community outreach and having talents being able to be in the local community and do interviews and be somewhat approachable and reachable in terms of you can have access to them, is the fact that it gives people a chance to try new things before they do it on TV, particularly in a company like WWE where Vince McMahon has all the power. Do you really want to be screwing up that move you've only really tried once with your friend on live national television? Because you won't get a second chance. AEW have AEW Dark, where they have a chance to edit out some of the really bad mess ups, and AEW Dynamite has some mess ups, but nothing that's overly unprofessional anymore. They have had some things, but that happens to everybody. Just look at the Survivor Series pay per view with the pre show, where they had the gobbledygooker win the 24/7 championship, and they're chasing after the gobbledygooker, and then they just stop and start walking together back into the backstage area. So mistakes can happen. But if you're looking at TV mistakes, and that's a production mistake, the camera not going away when everything should have on the Survivor Series pre-show. When you come to things being messed up, like trying a spot, trying out a hope spot, trying out something, what you have is, if you do it in front of a live show, what you get is the fans don't like it, you go, right, I'm not going to do that on TV. Conversely, what you get when you try certain things, unfortunately, on national television, particularly when you work for Vince, is that you just won't get a second chance. And that, when people say that the house shows being gone are going to be a great thing for the talent, it's really not. Think of how many people learn by working. You know, if you write an essay, your first essay is going to be rubbish because you don't know the process. You know, if you're like me, 7 years down the line, you're looking at the essay and you're going, do you know what? I know how to do this. I can write this. I'll be fine. And that's the mechanic that we're going to lose in wrestling. The reason that the business is so vastly different is because people aren't learning in the same way. Unfortunately, hopefully, we have some people. I mean, Goldust has got a school coming. Tyler Black, Seth Rollins has got a school. The Dudleys still have theirs, I believe. There's several places with schools that are doing good things. The problem is there's only so much you can learn before you have to go out and try these things. And then you have to learn how to work in front of an audience, and then you have to learn how to work to the cameras. These are all things you can't do just by being thrown on TV. So hopefully they have some plan for how we're going to get people to develop over the next couple of years, because we've had some people develop really well based on the fact that the indie scene really blew up over the past couple of years. Again, with WWE talent leaving, Cody Rhodes and several others, it did flood the industry with a little bit of buzz and gave some indie shows a little bit of a lift, and that in turn led to AEW. Would you have the same if you just have, I mean, just now what we have is TV companies. We don't have any live shows to speak of major companies. So it's quite interesting to see what we're going to get over the next couple of years, particularly with WWE wanting to have live audiences again the night after WrestleMania. And there is going to be a large appetite to see live wrestling, and that could lead to live shows returning, particularly if they do test runs in particular markets. I know that AEW, we're always talking about live shows becoming a thing, particularly doing tours of the UK and maybe grabbing a TV whilst we're here as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Now, rather than hypothesizing about things, let's talk about something else that's quite negative. I did want to kind of sandwich a different story in between the two negatives. For anybody who's a fan of Impact and ROH, or Jimmy Rave, he was just this weird. Basically, I have a friend who acts exactly like Jimmy Rave. If you combine Jimmy Rave with several other members of the Impact Wrestling roster at that time, particularly Alex Shelley, you have one particular friend, and it's spooky. So rather than say it out loud, let's look at the story of what's actually happened. So Jimmy Rave was a part of Ring of Honor from 2003 to 2007, wrestled in Impact sporadically between 2007 and 2013, and he's been in the Indies since 2013. I know he's kind of walked away a few times from it due to personal issues, but he ranked as the 181st best wrestler in the world in 2009, held championships in just about every company he's ever worked in. The one thing that's kind of weird, he put out almost like a PSA He's been very blessed for the last 21 years in professional wrestling and getting to live out my dream. Today, that dream has ended for me, and I have a new reality. This past Tuesday, my world came crashing down when the doctors found an infection in my left arm. I tried toughing it out, but by the time I saw a doctor, it was too late, and I had to amputate my left arm above the elbow, thus effectively ending my in-ring career. Now, male pride is a terrible thing, but it's a guy who clearly had something wrong with his arm and decided to wait until it was really bad, and he ended up getting his arm amputated. So it's scary to see. I mean, this is somebody who wrestled for 20 years and will have had broken bones, will have had injuries, and just kind of soldiered through it. And now he's lost an arm. Not for a second suggesting that's the fault of the wrestling business, but it's quite interesting to see the level of support he had, despite not being what you would consider a mainstream wrestler. I mean, yeah, he was in Impact Wrestling. Yeah, he did wrestle in companies like Ring of Honor and places that we would know. But at the same time, he's somebody who, as far as I can see, is not going to be considered a Hall of Famer in any of the major companies. So it's fascinating to see what the system is going to become for people like this, because I know WWE have looked after former talents before, and the former talents they've looked after are, ones who have addiction problems. Certainly, if companies want to make themselves look positive, then reaching out and helping somebody like Jimmy Rave, Ring of Honor, particularly if they could do something like running benefit shows or offering him. Here's the thing. Particularly with Undertaker's retirement, just because you can't go in the ring anymore doesn't mean you're not productive, doesn't mean you are not able to do things. And the fact that he's lost his arm doesn't mean that he's lost his ability to wrestle. It means he can go out and be a producer. He can help with training. I know he's helped out in wrestling schools, and that's kind of part of what he plans on doing now that he's retired. He can pass on that wisdom. But surely there's a company out there that can offer him something a bit more permanent, a bit more secure, as a person who invested so much of his life in the wrestling business. Now, WWE, if you've been a fan of the Thunderdome, their residency ends at the venue, the Amway Center, because of the fact that the Amway Center is being used for basketball. So they will be moving from the Amway Center in Orlando to Tropicana Field, which is about 2 hours south. According to a report by the Wrestling Observer, WWE may face two issues in the new building. Now, the less pressing issue is the acoustics. As you might guess from the name, Tropicana Field is normally home to the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, and the game of baseball takes much more room than basketball. This may lead to a challenge for the production team, where they may end up having to almost compartmentalize the building, which will be interesting to see and may allow them certain additional activities they couldn't do before. The backstage area may be able to be expanded. There may be certain things they can do that they couldn't do in the Amway Center. But the more pressing issue is there's a flock of pigeons that live in the rafters, and fans of the Rays will know they sometimes fly down and disturb the game. And will the birds attempt to descend on the matches, much like Sting did for the NWO, or much like Shawn Michaels did at WrestleMania, or will they take a big dump on some of the matches like we do? So it's going to be interesting to see. December 11th is when the first SmackDown will air from Tropicana Field. So it'll be interesting to see what differences we get. Because of the size of the building, we may get a slightly bigger Thunderdome, or they may just compartmentalize it similar to what AEW have done. But certainly we're going to see some changes when it comes to Raw and SmackDown and how they look. WWE very lucky, of course, that they have Florida at all to use for shows, because I know some states are actually struggling. Now, one of the things that's quite interesting is Kevin Sullivan, who is a legend, was this week on the VOC Nation's In the Room podcast. He talked about his start in wrestling, people who inspired him, the importance of kayfabe, the current product, the downfall of WCW, and various other things. We know certainly some things he wouldn't be talking about. But let's talk about a couple of the things that he thought were important. So firstly, he was talking about how to fix WWE's ratings. And he says, if I was Vince McMahon, I'd ask The Undertaker, what do you need? And we'll give it to you. Stay out of your way and you book it. I think Undertaker would turn that business around in 6 months. Interesting. I don't think Taker wants to be a booker. I think he wants to be a trainer so he can pass on wisdom. But it'd be certainly interesting. If anybody wants to reach out, who do you think would be a good booker from back in the day, or somebody who's recently retired? Because there are recent reports, despite the fact that you think wrestlers are going to be great in this production and scripting role, that they're really not. You look at some of the issues that we've had with, Kevin Nash being a bad booker, or at least perceived to be. Various other ex-wrestlers like Ric Flair perceived to look after their friends. Whether these are true or not, it's not the point. What is important is that you have two examples of wrestlers being involved in the creative process, and that's happening right now. So on SmackDown, you have Daniel Bryan. On Raw, you have Edge. And the reports are that Edge is sucking in his role. He's offering advice, but it's not productive. It's not helping people. Conversely, Daniel Bryan's showing up to meetings. He's taking notes. He's offering suggestions, and he's helping talent out. Something I think he really has wanted to do. But they're both wrestling fans. And it's not to say that Edge is doing a bad job. Edge's advice maybe just doesn't work for everybody. So perhaps this is a great way of putting this. Is it necessarily Edge's fault that he's struggling in that role, or at least perceived to be? Or is it because they've put him in a role that's not right for him? When it comes to Undertaker, is he the right man to be booking TV? I don't think so. I think Taker would acknowledge himself. He's probably not the right person to book it. And when you bring in people and put them in a role that's not suitable, then they're never going to thrive. Eric Bischoff, great example, turned into the director of SmackDown when he said himself, I didn't want to be a boss. I wanted to be a cast member. That's what he said this week. So it's interesting to see WWE seem to be misplacing talent right now, and not just on screen. A lot of backstage stuff is going wrong. But there's a lot of upheaval in WWE, a lot of executives changing, and this happens to coincide with the rebirth of those rumors that WWE is going to be bought by Disney again. So, it would be interesting if WWE were bought by Disney. I don't think Disney want to have a wrestling company. Certainly, there's a lot of controversies that Disney will not want to be attached to. However, I can tell you from my academic work, Disney still broadcast content that basically exhibits racism. They just put a warning beforehand. So there's a lot of fear from people I've seen who think Disney would basically destroy the wrestling business. But they've made Star Wars more profitable. They made several franchises that they've taken over more profitable. They gave a platform to The Simpsons. So people who've never seen it or never had access to the expensive cable packages can now get Disney Plus, and they have all the seasons of The Simpsons. Disney might not necessarily be a bad thing. It might cut out a lot of the dead wood. It certainly would get rid of some of the people who've been around for too long. I'm not mentioning Michael Hayes' name here, but maybe Michael Hayes is one of them. A dinosaur that perhaps should be eliminated from the business. Now, I did mention the presence of Eric Bischoff there in WWE. One of the things that's quite interesting is he is involved as one of the executive producers of the new Hulk Hogan project, which has got Chris Hemsworth in it, I believe. The pictures of him, I'm not going to share them because I'm just angry that anybody could look this good. But the pictures of him in his exercises to make himself look like Hulk Hogan is incredible. Now, the project is still in development, so it's not scheduled for production. There's no casting going on. There's no scheduling going on. But Bischoff has said it's in the late stages of development, so it's not a done deal by any stretch of the imagination. But it is going to happen at the minute, in terms of if you got Chris Hemsworth attached, the financial package is there in place. Obviously, COVID's delaying it. And Eric Bischoff said he was involved in the early stages in terms of piecing things together, and it's already done. But Todd Phillips will be the director. He's one of the more sought-after directors in America, in Hollywood. Scott Silver is the writer. And Chris Hemsworth as the lead star, which seems like a weird choice, but Hulk Hogan's given him the thumbs up. So by the look of it, COVID's stopping production, and really, realistically, you could film some stuff right now, but when a lot of the stuff you need is crowds, you need WrestleMania 3 for Hulk Hogan, you need the NWO, and you can't do that in an empty building. So hopefully, at some point, we will get the Hulk Hogan biopic, because the plan was that we'd get to see it on places like Netflix relatively quickly. It would be streamed quite quickly after a cinematic release. So that's kind of interesting. Now, one of the things I've really enjoyed the past couple of years is the Dark Side of the Ring. Some of it is really well researched. Others, they kind of gloss over details, and it's a TV format. They have to get things done in 42 minutes, whatever the time they've been allotted. But the Dark Side of the Ring would end up having extra episodes that would elaborate on stories a little bit. The problem with that is, much like Being the Elite, how many people watch the extra shows? So it's quite interesting that one of the producers of the show actually released a statement, and it was given to WrestleLink, and they said there are no plans for an episode about China for an upcoming season of Dark Side of the Ring. At the start of pre-production earlier this year, we became aware of multiple projects that were currently in production about China and decided not to do so. I think season 2 started to kind of scrape the bottom of the barrel. I mean, to suggest the Brawl for All is the dark side of wrestling is ridiculous. The fact that they're staying away from the China story is a good thing. There are controversial stories in wrestling that they should be telling. I certainly think the Dark Side of the Ring should go from being a 6 or 8 episode series to just be specials. And then that way, when stuff happens, they have a chance to come in and do something. Now, one of the things that kind of, we did a quick show on it back in April. It kind of shocked us as people were being released, was they released people like Finlay, Lance Storm. They released Hurricane Helms. Fit Finlay and Hurricane Helms are both back in the company. Apparently, Hurricane Helms' first day was last Monday, where he was involved in several matches. And obviously, Finlay is back as well, which would be a great thing for the females in that company, because to be honest, the females benefited greatly from Goldust and Fit Finlay when he was involved in the training before he left. So it's quite interesting, because I was talking earlier about people being on the road and getting a chance to learn, and that's when Lana in her documentary was saying at house shows, that's when she'd be able to grab people and take them in the ring for 20 minutes and just be shown something, and that you could try it out that night. Can't do that at TV. You lose that. And people like Finlay and Shane Helms, two guys who definitely have a lot to offer. And I think WWE are wise to bring these guys back, particularly as they're looking at their roster and realizing that they had a period of contraction where the shows were having like 30, 40-minute matches to fill time because they couldn't honor they didn't have the full roster. But now the roster's getting back to normal, and now more and more people are returning. It's going to be beneficial for them to have people like Fit Finlay and Shane Helms. A lot of people questioned him becoming a road agent, but as a producer, here's a guy who's worked in major companies, been on TV. He's a smaller guy. He knows what Vince McMahon wants, and he also knows how to play the political game as well. So he's somebody who's very smart and somebody that you would want to have around. So we've got 3 stories left. I'm going to leave the negative one for the end. But Young Rock, the TV series, has begun filming. Go out of your way to check this out. The Rock's super proud of it, telling the story of The Rock when he was a kid. I've already seen pictures of the Iron Sheik actor, the Andre the Giant actor, and his mum and dad. And I'm going to tell you now, for people who know who these people are and have seen pictures of them and went out of their way to watch old wrestling, they've done such a good job of casting. Hopefully the production of this is incredible. It's been filmed in Australia, and it looks very interesting. It's the showrunner is Nanachka Khan, who's the creator of Fresh Off the Boat, and The Rock will appear in every episode of the series. It's not entirely clear what his role will be, but when I read the pitch for the show, it just made me think of Everybody Hates Chris, the show where Chris Rock was telling basically stories from his childhood and changed them up a little bit. I think we're going to get a similar feel from this, and if we do, I can't complain. I'm a big fan of The Rock, so to see him doing something on TV as well, it's just incredible. Now, one of the people who everybody seems to be a fan of right now is Jon Moxley. I'm not so much a fan, but he did do I hate the name of this, but the oral sessions with his wife, Renee Young. And he said that his favorite thing was to do a bunch of coke and go to the library. Moxley later clarified it wasn't a bunch of cocaine, as he didn't have that much money, just enough cocaine. Well, that's important then, yeah. So he's just doing a little bit, so it's fine. And when asked what he would read, he said he'd read absolutely anything to get educated in some stuff. Moxley then said, "It's not that weird," and tells the children to consult your local library, as they just let you borrow stuff for free, and late fees are small. That's the most random thing. Giving kids advice whilst also kind of telling influential children that he took coke, and he's not bragging about it. I get it. He's saying it's what he did, but he's offering advice to children whilst also saying he took coke to do it as well. So all we need is that first person to take coke and do it, and then we're in trouble. Okay, so let's move past that. I just thought it stuck out a little bit that he would do that. Anybody who's been a wrestling fan for a while will remember things like the AOL chat rooms and all that kind of stuff. And one of the people that I used to speak to was Steve Carino. Every now and again, I know several other people like Grado and that had brief conversations with him online. But one of the people that you would occasionally be able to stumble upon was Bob Ryder. Bob Ryder was involved in various wrestling companies, but Bob Ryder also ended up being one of the founders of Impact Wrestling. He was one of the people who were involved in travel. He was involved in various aspects. Now, he was the Prodigy Chats or guy in the 1990s. His role was to launch OneWrestling.com with Joey Styles, and he also co-hosted WCW Live. And he was a massive fan of wrestling. But what's quite interesting was he was a polarizing figure for some, in the sense that nobody disliked him as a person because he was always very nice and polite. The problem was that sometimes if Impact would let him down with money, he wouldn't be open and honest. Ask Steve Carino. There were times where he would be the messenger. He would be in a similar position that Jim Ross was in for a while, having to dish out all the bad news. So it's a shame. Bob Ryder is somebody whose name was put around as almost a wrestling agent for a while as well. He is somebody who will never get the credit he deserves, in the sense that the effort and role that he would have had in Impact Wrestling. He was on that infamous boat trip where Jeff Jarrett decided to set up a wrestling company to make sure he could win a belt. That's the story. Obviously, it's more than that. You know, Jeremy Borash, Jeff Jarrett, a few others were just sitting on a boat having fun, talking about whether they could set up their own company. So it's interesting to see Bob Ryder is somebody who there's been a lot of love, a lot of outpouring of support for his family as well. So I'm very happy to see that love and outpouring of support. And this is the first time that I've done this show, or attempted to, in essentially one go. So we're going to try our best to go through it without any edits this week. Now, one of the things that I do normally do is I do Raw, SmackDown, AEW, NXT, talk about what I've watched that week, but to let you know whether I enjoyed it. Now, there's two things I have watched this week. One is the Lana documentary, which clearly designed to make her into a babyface character. My takeaway from it was not, this is a person we should be feeling positive things towards. This is a person who I think there's some genuine issues there, underlying issues beneath the surface. She's very childish, not childish, childlike, and she isn't the most secure person. So I think maybe being out in the public eye, maybe not the best thing for her mental health. But she's busting her ass. She is, week after week, she's out there and she's trying. I've seen her live. She can bump. She is a character that people hate. I think when audiences come back, if they book Lana in the correct way, they have got such a good person there to work with. I'm so concerned WWE are just going to turn her heel as soon as the crowds come back, because the crowds are going to boo her a little bit. But if you book people properly, then you're fine. People liked Rusev. People didn't like Lana. That's because they booked her that way. You can book Lana in a better way. The version of Lana we saw in that documentary, where we got to find out her real name, speak to her parents, and all that stuff, it's very cool to see. We've got the Live one that's debuting this weekend, and we're getting to see different sides of people. We certainly got to see a different side of Drew. We've seen various people over the past couple of years, getting to see a little bit behind the scenes and find out who they are. Particularly the Braun Strowman one was very good. Although again, that one seemed very scripted. And if you've ever seen Hogan Knows Best, I mean, it was scripted. The Nasty Boys have come out and said it themselves. It was scripted. The scenarios were painted and they just filled them in. But something about the Braun Strowman one didn't sit well with me. And I realized WWE still control this. It's not a documentary as such. It's a documentary with things they want you to know. So they've cut out various things. But with Braun, his crying seemed very forced. And then with Lana, she seemed very childlike. And just so for one example, when her wrestling gear arrived, she was showing it off, and it was in such a way it reminded me of my children when they get their new cool toy and they come and show you it. That's not how I picture a wrestler who gets their ring gear acting. That's not to say it's a bad thing. She was excited. I'm not childlike isn't childish is a bad thing. Childlike is not a bad thing. Childlike is just one of those things that kind of change how you look at it. Now, we'll move beyond the Lana thing because I do think WWE documentaries are really, really good. I just think that the fact that some of them are scripted is very, very off-putting. But we did have some really cool things on the Survivor Series show that also I watched at the weekend. Now, this week I've been doing a 3,000-word essay. I'm putting a lot of work into it. So I've decided to almost take the week off of wrestling, delay the show for a couple of days because of the video that I've received from Murphy. I obviously wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of digesting that and making sure we could put that out. But Survivor Series, for me, almost a good show, just several things let it down. So let's look briefly. We had obviously the Gobbledygooker win the 24/7 championship. They're now selling an autographed 24/7 championship on the auction site that WWE have. The Miz won the Joe Brand Battle Royal. Team Raw decimated SmackDown in the men's match. We had the Street Profits versus the New Day, with Street Profits coming out. Bobby Lashley winning. Sasha Banks beating Asuka. We had Lana in, for me, and this is why I mentioned Lana. So we showed producer Zoe Styles the finish of the match where Lana wasn't really allowed to compete. She was left to stand in the background like she was some, servant or wife in a culture where you're not allowed to have the women walking in line with the men. And the fact that Nia Jax and Bianca Belair got counted out meant that Lana was the sole survivor. It was a very clever finish and a great way of getting Lana over. But if you're booking her as a babyface, why is she over celebrating the fact that she won even though she didn't do anything? If you're booking her as a face, you can't confuse it. You need to have her confused and not understanding what's going on and just avoid having her coming across as a heel. After that, we had Roman Reigns versus Drew McIntyre, possibly one of my favorite matches of the year, although I wasn't a big fan of the outcome. I did expect Roman Reigns to win. For me, Survivor Series was a cracker. It was a very, very good show. We just had that bit at the end where you had like 30 guys come out and then they disappear. Vince McMahon cuts the most awkward promo that it seems to have no point and just meanders. And then we end up with The Undertaker coming out and cutting a fairly generic Undertaker promo where he thanked people. And the only bit that I thought was worth the build-up that we've had for 6 or 8 weeks was the fact that there was a little hologram of Paul Bearer that was there. That was kind of cool. But for me, it just didn't seem like a finale. Didn't seem like a full stop. And I get that he probably wanted to just go out with everybody knowing it was the end and do something normal. Didn't want to have a big storyline thing, but didn't have to be a storyline thing. You didn't have to have Bray Wyatt attack him. You didn't have to have a feud. I just think it was a massive letdown. And I think WWE they're great at building up these cool stories and moments. And that one for me was a massive letdown. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go straight into Opinion Corner. This is a weird show not having any bumpers to break it up so I can go to the toilet and have a drink or whatever. The first Opinion Corner, Tony Khan compares AEW's audience awareness to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm sorry. But if you're an AEW fan, this guy's an absolute moron. All he's doing is making himself out into a character. I've not been a fan of Tony Khan and his approach and how he's been dealing with things. A guy with no experience who's messed up American football teams, and now a wrestling company. And I know people enjoy some of their product, and that's fine. But a guy with no experience should not be booking a show. And it's clear. You can see the content they're putting out. Some great wrestlers, some great matches, but no direction. Things happening just because they think it's cool, but no long-term planning. And if anybody wants to tell me that Kenny Omega has been long-term planning, then you're entirely missing the point of what long-term planning is. There's absolutely zero chance that they have planned any story in long-term detail, because Tony Khan's openly admitted that every week that he will do matches because he thinks they're cool, or they'll do segments because they think they're cool. He has said, we all have made our mission with AEW is to give a wrestling show that was giving the fans what they were missing in wrestling. I think we've carved out a great space for ourselves, similar to Marvel. Now, in that message after the first bit, and okay, fine, they're offering something different, something that isn't available in WWE. But to compare yourself to a billion-dollar franchise that is able to churn out content and it sells no matter its quality is ridiculous. And this is a person who, I'm not attacking him because I'm not a fan of AEW. I like a lot of the stuff AEW do. What I'm saying is, here's a guy who outright tells you that he's crazy. And people are just willing to accept it. Now, this isn't the only time he's done things like this. As an American football club owner, he's turned around and said he's got a statistics business and they're going to be the leaders in this. So why are his fans burning their jerseys? Why are fans protesting? Why were fans so unhappy they said they'd never return? The reason is because these teams are being mismanaged. And yes, they may get success at points. They may achieve promotion in Fulham's case. They may achieve victories in games in Jacksonville Jaguars' case. They may achieve ratings victories against the third brand in wrestling. But that doesn't mean that they are a successful entity. Just look at Fulham. I mean, the problem with Tony Khan is he wants to seem like he's open to the fans. The problem is any fan that disagrees with him gets spoken down to, because obviously he knows better in a sport that he basically started watching the week that he bought Fulham, or rather that his dad did, because his dad bought Fulham. His dad bought the Jacksonville Jaguars, and his dad bought him a wrestling company. Just saying. Now, when it comes to Fulham, he said on his Twitter, I apologise to Fulham supporters for our performance tonight. We've looked to add centre-back since Wembley. I'm sorry we haven't yet, as two got COVID and we lost a free we thought we was close. I had another issue with a fourth centre-back. I promise players are coming in and better efforts from this squad. Now, everybody's watching this now thinking, well, that's football. This isn't wrestling. Right? So let me explain how this is important. What he's just done in trying to defend himself to say that they are putting efforts out there to attract players, they've just told the players they're going to try and sign to fill those gaps. They were fifth choice. Now, yeah, money talks and people might go in. But if you've ever applied for a job and they've told you, yeah, there was 4 other people we wanted, but we've had to go for you, it's not very good at building your morale, is it? And I think the one thing that Tony is that if he never said that message, the fans wouldn't have been angry. The fans were not cheered up by that. The fans realized that not only did they not sign players, but they're actually trying and not able to. That's a bad thing. I know people don't maybe want to see it that same way, but it's a bad thing. Trust me, it's a bad thing. Jamie Carragher's response, I've watched the video of this, and it's funny. So let me just say this. He's a clown to get involved in that. Is he the owner or the CEO? When told by the host that Tony is the director of football, that's right, the director of football, a role that at other clubs is held by former managers, club legends, and the son of the owner, Carragher said the tweet could have an adverse effect on the Fulham squad. Just keep your mouth shut, is what Carragher said. Didn't he get involved a few years ago? Wasn't he the one buying players and messing it all up? Just shut your mouth and keep your head down. This is what he's been told in American football. This is what he's been told in football. This is what is happening that is wrong with Tony Khan. It's not that he's necessarily making mistakes, and he is. Everybody does. It's not necessarily that he wants to have a connection with the fans, because he can. But Roy Keane said it best when he said, "You shouldn't be discussing the club's business with fans on Twitter. Take your medicine and look at things over the next few days." Basically, shut your damn mouth and do a better job. Because they have press conferences every bloody week. And it's like listening to Nicola Sturgeon. They achieve absolutely bugger all. And people think that, oh, well, he talks to us every week. It must mean something. It doesn't. And that's the problem. Tony must want to become a character. But the only character he can become isn't a babyface because his dad's buying him everything. The simple fact is that Tony Khan is director of football without any football experience. He is also a wrestling booker without booking experience. And people can say, oh, yes, but AEW is putting out good content. Do you think Tony Khan's booking the matches? Or do you think that the likes of Dean Malenko, Billy Gunn are sitting there with talents and helping them to put on the matches? Because I'll tell you, you can hear it in JR's voice. Some of the stuff that's going out on air is dire. And that's the problem AEW apparently don't seem willing to tackle. Now, I'll get past my first rant and let's look at a second rant. The past couple of months, we've had videos on from Stuart Murphy. We had an appearance last week from JJ for the first time in a while. I thought he wasn't watching or talking, and he appeared on the show. We're not going to talk about any of those things because this week I had a message from Murphy saying that he wanted to get a few things off his chest. He'd been wanting to do it for a while, and he wanted to make sure that it was being done out with the realms of CWF. It's in reference to CWF with some things, but of course, the one problem that he has is that he doesn't want to make this something that's sponsored. So today's show is not sponsored at all. In addition to that, CWF is not going to have any kind of attempt to make you laugh or do something that's going to make you think that Murphy's a good guy or a bad guy or anything like that. This is Stuart Murphy talking about things that he's been asked. So in setting up a company, one of the things he always gets asked is, who trained you? One of the other things that he always gets asked is about the fact that they had a show booked in November of last year that was pulled, and it was pulled at the last minute. He goes into both of those things. He obviously is unwilling to name the person who trained him, and you will find out why when we see his video. But what I do want to say, I'm going to say a little bit more after the video, but I do want to say that I've seen the evidence, at least, of why the CWF show was cancelled. That's been shown to me, and I put out an open invitation to the person that is mentioned, well, the company that is mentioned, that I'm more than happy to speak with them if they believe that things happened in a different way, and we can present the evidence as well, because quite frankly, what they did, if it isn't illegal, it should be. So for me, this has been a long time coming. It's been alluded to once or twice in terms of a company being involved in why CWF's first show in November was cancelled. However, Murphy has wanted to directly address it, and so he will today.
Hi guys, Stuart Murphy here, owner of CWF, sponsor of Headlocks and Headphones. We're having a change of pace this week, and instead of doing anything to do storyline wise for the company, I have something I need to get off my chest. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, in fact, before I start, I have already spoke to the host, Matt Anderson, about this, and he is okay with this being broadcast on his show. And I thank him for that, because everyone needs to hear this. For those of you that aren't aware, CWF attempted to open its doors and run the first show in November 24th of 2019. Now this show didn't go ahead as planned. But here's the reason for that. The reason, people are led to believe the reason was that we pulled the show, couldn't afford to do the show, we didn't want to do the show, and that's basically what went out there about us, and it resulted in companies not wanting to let us borrow talent and stuff like that. The actual reason that show didn't go ahead is going to be revealed right now. Now, we booked a venue, and we booked talent, and we had our card all sorted, ready to go, tickets on sale, yada yada yada. Now, a company that's reasonably established in the Scottish wrestling scene sent a private message to our company Facebook, which is now deactivated, and the result of that is about to come out in this. They sent a private message to the company Facebook page telling us that all Scottish talent who had been booked to appear on the CWF show in November 2019 had been asked to pull out of the card. The reason for it was an oversight on my own part. Right? Not one that I agree with, because the oversight was that I booked a venue that this reasonably established company have ran for a few years now. That was an oversight on my part. The way it should have been handled was them saying they would rather we ran it in a different venue. And that would have been fine. We would have went and checked for another venue, and we would have got it all sorted, not stepping on anyone's toes. However, it was the bullying tactics, not just from the company themselves, but from followers of the company and supporters of the company, who then flooded us with abuse of all kinds to try and get us to pull our show. Now, I admittedly caved under the pressure, and I pulled the show. But the only reason I pulled the show is because half my card was told that they wouldn't get bookings again if they worked the show for me. So not only were all talent asked to pull out of my show, but they were told that if they worked for my show that night, they would never get booked again by the company that asked them to pull out. Now that is something that really shouldn't be happening in the world of professional wrestling. Now, when we say on our social media platforms, and I cannot stress this enough, when we say on our social media platforms that we want to change the world of pro wrestling, this is the sort of stuff we want to do away with. We don't want promoters getting bullied into cancelling shows. We don't want talent getting threatened never to get booked again if they don't pull out of a certain company's show. We don't want this. The company in question, if you want to know, I'll happily name them. The company in question that is guilty of this is SWA. Now there's another, now that I've got that out of the way, that is one of the things that we want to change the CWF. We want that never to be the case for any, not just for us, but for any wrestling company or wrestling promoter around the world, not just in Scotland, but around the world. That should not be happening. The next thing and final thing I want to discuss is I have been getting a lot of private messages on my Twitter, at CWF Murphy Stew, by the way, asking where I trained. But actually having people going as far as saying that if I don't tell people where I trained or who trained me, then they don't believe that I've been trained. Now, I'm addressing that right now. I have been trained. Not fully, but I'm trained enough in the basics that I could get through a match, but I wouldn't be able to do anything strenuous. The reason I choose not to disclose where I trained or who I got trained by is for the following reasons. The person who trained me was probably, and it links in perfectly to the company I was just speaking about, but they're nothing to do with that company. It was one of the biggest bullies I've ever come across in my life. Admittedly, when I started training to be a pro wrestler, I was slightly overweight and didn't have the cardio, didn't have the stamina or anything like that. Now, I was told, rightfully so, by the trainer at the time, if I worked on my cardio and improved that, improved my stamina and got into better shape, then I had a chance of making it as a pro wrestler. So I set about that. I improved my cardio. I improved my stamina, and I got myself into better shape. I went back and I was getting comments similar, in fact worse than what I've ever had in my life. I got bullied in school as well, which is why this whole bullying and abuse in pro wrestling really hits home with me. The things I was getting called, I was going back, I was walking through the door with the trainer at the time saying, "Here comes Fatso, here comes Fatty." Every time I walked through the door, they'd go, "Oh, does everyone hear the earthquake coming?" It wasn't nice things to hear at all, and it really devalued me, degraded me, and put me down something horrible. But I wanted to wrestle, so I put it all behind me. I thought maybe this is just normal, maybe it's just something that people do, but it turns out it wasn't. Eventually I was trained and told that if I want to make it in pro wrestling, I have to get my name out there, so I have to do stuff to get my name out there. I says, yeah, I understand that, and I set about doing that. So I started messaging promotions around the UK asking, saying I'm a trainee wrestler, I need to get my name out. My trainer says I need to get my name out. Are you looking for talent for any of your shows? When asked who trained me and I told them, my trainer would get on at me saying that I shouldn't be telling people who trained me, I shouldn't be asking people for shows, I shouldn't be trying to get my name out there. Everything he told me to do that I was doing, and he was taking it all back. And I felt worthless. And I says, well, if I'm not going to be allowed to wrestle here, I will start my own company and I will bring in people that can help me become better in ring, and I'll wrestle there. The response I got was, if I opened my own company, he would get me blacklisted from every wrestling promotion in the country and would make sure that he went to extreme lengths to have the company shut down. So, with all due respect to everyone messaging me privately, this is why I don't tell people who trained me or where I was trained, because I am ashamed of where I was trained, and I am ashamed of the person that trained me. And he will remain anonymous, because I don't feel comfortable naming the person for fear of backlash, basically. But that's it. That's the change of pace for today's show. No characters work from me at all, nothing. This is me, this is 100% the real Stuart Murphy, and this is my story, really. I hope you enjoy the rest of the show, and I hope I've not put too much of a downer on things. But please, continue to support pro wrestling, because now more than ever, pro wrestling needs your support.
Okay, so let's quickly address some of the things in the video. Now, Murphy mentioned that he backed down and cancelled the first show for CWF. The person who was helping him in the conversations basically told the Scottish Wrestling Alliance and its owner to basically go do one. They were going to do the show, and Murphy realised it was probably a good idea not to have animosity with other promotions and try and build friendships and relationships with promoters and share talent and be friendly and try and just give people more work. That's the game. Which all sounds good on paper, and from what Murphy's been telling me, that's what he wants to do. He's as they book the first show date again and they get everything set, they're going to be reaching out to every promotion that is within driving distance and kind of trying to let everybody know who they are and build some bridges and make everything positive. The one company they will definitely not be doing that with is the Scottish Wrestling Alliance. And there are several other companies, I can tell you, have done the exact same thing. Now, contact was made by CWF in relation to putting on a show to two other companies directly, one of which has been recently subject to some controversy, and one that's managed to remain relatively unscathed. One's in Dundee and one's in the northeast of Scotland. Not going to mention their names because largely theirs was just continuing the closed door policy that wrestling has. And one of the things that pisses me off a little bit about this is that people know it's happening. There's one person who talks about wrestling, and I'm not going to be specific about this person because I don't want to throw them under the bus, but there is one person that talks about wrestling here in the UK, and they have a podcast and they talk about wrestling a lot, and they know what's going on, and they shrug it off. And this is part of the problem that led to the speaking out movement being such a big deal, is that quite a lot of people knew about all this stuff. I have recently had somebody come to me with a very detailed story, but obviously I can't share it and I can't put it out there in relation to who it's about because it's not my story to tell. But at the same time, this person's so scared because although they've seen everything and they have some evidence, they actually train with this person and they don't want to give up their training. This in itself is the problem that leads to the second claim that Murphy is making. Now, I say the word claim. I know for a fact the first one is true because I've seen the evidence. The details, like anytime you book a wrestling show, putting posters up is still something that you would do. The threat was any poster you put up will not be seen. We were told anybody who worked our show would not be allowed to work for him ever again. Therefore, all the people would pull out so they could still work for the Scottish Wrestling Alliance. We were then told that they were booking a show the week before or the week after. I can't remember which one. It was relatively close. And as a result, we were offered several condescending comments in the messages. And when I say we because when I read it, I almost kind of rooted for the underdog. And as CWF is my sponsor, I kind of feel part of that. So to see how they were treated by a company, and it gets worse because when a wrestling company tries to set up shows, the one thing they have to do is reach out to wrestlers and try and book them. Well, at this point, CWF had actually reached out to mostly talent from the north of England, with several talents that were, in fact, SWA talents. And we then started to receive nasty messages, threatening messages. And again, I say we because as these were coming in, I was being sent them. So I felt like I was part of this because I was being told what was happening. I almost had to root for the people being picked on, CWF. And it does sound petty and childish, but that's what it is. And it gets worse. So the one thing that amused me was, despite at the time having literally no involvement other than knowing somebody who runs the company, my telephone rang. And my telephone rang, and it was the venue that had been booked for show one. Now, I can show you the poster. It would give away where the venue was, but it was in Clydebank. And the intention was to put on a show just outside Glasgow, kind of get all the errors out the way, and then CWF was going to launch properly in Glasgow with a bigger show, more talent, more expensive, put some budget into it. But I get a phone call, and bear in mind, my number is not the CWF number. It's also not the telephone number that was given to the people who were booking the venue. What happened was, at some point, because I had shared some CWF stuff, people started looking and finding my phone number, and they called the venue. And because Stuart Murphy at this point had wanted to remain anonymous and didn't put his details out there, and I'd shared CWF stuff, because I was the only person they could see sharing it, I had to be the owner. So they contacted the venue that had been booked for the show and decided to tell them that the venue couldn't run the show because it was an SWA venue, which is what I was told on the phone. I was also told that we weren't insured. Again, I say we. I was not the person running the company, but I'm being told that the company wasn't insured. There was event insurance in place. I was told that the company was not going to be allowed to run, and the event had been cancelled. Bear in mind, this was something like 2 weeks out. Okay. Now we can go a little bit further into this. We now go into part 2 of the story. Now I don't want to give the name of the person away because Murphy's made it very clear he sees there being a genuine threat there from this person. This person was part of the speaking out movement. There are allegations about other things about this person. The allegations Murphy is making, I can't prove them. I have no evidence of those. What I can say is, and Murphy is probably going to be angry for me doing this, I'm not going to mention any names. This person was somebody who Murphy reached out to when he was setting up a company. And you heard what was said in relation to, he'd be blacklisted and everything. And the one part that Murphy probably won't want me to mention is the fact that this person then created an obligation for Murphy to hire the ring for show 1 from him. Okay, well, every company that starts up needs a ring. Renting the ring for show 1 and being able to run things and get things set up and before you make that big expenditure makes a lot of sense. So Murphy went down that route instead of going down an additional route he had in place from talents that he had in the north of England. The week before the show was when all of this stuff kind of properly came to a head. When 2 weeks beforehand, the venue cancelled, and because I was the one that got the phone call, I'm saying just book a second venue. Book a second venue. You've got a QR code on the poster instead of a website. So if people scan the QR code, it'll take them to the link that tells them where the venue is. You make an announcement on social media, you should be fine. It's not a massive show with 10,000 people. It should be all covered. Within 48 hours, there was a message from Murphy's former trainer saying that he would no longer have access to a ring. This is the same week. So within 7 days, in fact, 5 days of the show going ahead, the ring was cancelled. The other option, which had been available several weeks before, was now booked out elsewhere. Even if the venue could have been booked, the only ring hire available at that time in that location pulled as well. That person happens to be very friendly with the SWA and happens to also be somebody who's worked several of their shows. He is somebody who, much like the Dundee-based company and much like the company in the Northeast, decided that they didn't want to encroach on other people's turf, which is fair enough. There are, of course, ways and means of doing things. Murphy admits himself he should have reached out and kind of figured out where he could and couldn't work. These are mistakes Murphy has made and will learn from, and that's why he's now open to being open with all the companies he can be, because that gives him a chance to go, okay, you're booking here. Do you mind if we book here? We can do this together. I can, arrangements can be made to make things a bit easier rather than threats and abuse. Trainers, as part of the speaking out movement, threats and abuse have been a big problem. That's basically one of the things that's really been a major cause of the speaking out movement, short of the sexual assault and sexual abuse allegations, to look at what is happening and to see firsthand that even after the speaking out movement, people have stories and they don't want to come forward because they're scared. And they're not scared that they're not going to be believed. They're scared that they're not going to be able to train because they'll be blacklisted. Murphy is bringing forward his fear because he knows for a fact things are still going to be made difficult for CWF. And he is a grown-ass man who is so scared of his former trainer he won't name him. And he's asked me not to name him. But I know his name, and he knows who he is. Several people know who he is. I'm sure one or two people can guess who he is. But if we don't mention his name, there could be no repercussions. Sooner or later, though, this person will have to answer for everything that they've done. And several other people will have to answer for the things that they've done. So before I go, I did say this on Twitter, and I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to say it out loud so that everybody knows. SWA, if you want to refute the allegations that you threatened and got your talent to threaten and made threats that you were going to pull down posters, you did get the venue cancelled. We know for a fact it was you that got the venue cancelled because they told us. They told us who phoned them. You can come on and refute these allegations if you want, or you can go on your social media and tell everybody that we're talking nonsense. I dare you, because we'll show all the evidence. Murphy has every single message that you sent. Murphy has the messages from your workers, and we'll share them all. Or you could apologize, privately message Murphy, and let's figure out how we can make sure that stuff like this doesn't happen between wrestling companies anymore. Because if one thing can come from talking about the fact that the SWA made threats to a promoter, perhaps we could actually make wrestling about giving people the chance to work and go and enjoy wrestling shows. Because you admit yourself, SWA is not a £1 million company. It's not your only job. But at the same time, you don't have a monopoly on any area. And if you don't want to be friendly to somebody else who promotes shows, that's fine. You don't have to be friendly. But I think people would be mightily pissed off if they found out that talent were being told, if you work for this company, you can't work for me. That sounds very... Well, I'll let you figure out what I'm thinking about here. There's a great book about the NWA and basically called it a monopoly. And monopolies are illegal. They did also say the NWA operated very much in the same way as the mafia, in the sense that everybody had territories and the crime lords would stick to their territory and they wouldn't step over their marks. You occasionally had big ones who could, and we obviously have wrestling companies that are big and go beyond that single boundary. However, the only way wrestling is going to change is not by allowing people to continue this stupid bullshit, and it's by giving people the chance to see exactly what wrestling companies are like. CWF told everybody they were going to be open and honest, and Murphy has wanted to say these things for a long time, and I'm sure at some point he will be open and honest enough to name who his trainer was, because it's somebody I respected a lot, and it's somebody that, honestly, he's let himself down a lot. The hazing that used to happen in the wrestling business, a lot of people have taken part in it. There's a lot of people out there who you're seeing who are saying, they support the speaking out movement, and these people are a problem and they're in the minority. They knew about it. They were part of it. They joined in. They laughed about it. They sat in the bars and got drunk laughing about it. The wrestling business in Scotland still has a lot of work to do, but there's a lot of great people out there. There's a lot of wrestlers I'm seeing in Scotland who are just trying to do something positive. Hopefully, Murphy saying what he has and us calling out the SWA for what they've done will allow the wrestling business to kind of start getting rid of these characters who want to treat it. They want to treat it like it's $1 million business. That's fine. You're not paying any of your wrestlers enough money to justify refusing them permission to work elsewhere, particularly if it's not on days when you're working. If you built up a brand that's good enough and big enough, and you still think a new company coming along is going to be easily confused with yours, then you're an idiot. There's a reason why up in Aberdeen, WrestleZone didn't try and block that other wrestling company that worked shows here in Aberdeen. Why? Because they knew people knew the WrestleZone brand. They knew that people understood the difference between the two companies. Shame you can't.